The topic is about corporate performance of two well-known major publishers, Macmillan Company of New York and Shanghai Commercial Press. We're doing it through the examination of the turnover over a period of 30 years. That's the background. And more the focus of our concern here is really the balance sheets of the year 1929. So our starting point is really in the late 1990s. Our concern is really at that time, the Chinese legal reform in the 20th century. They include the late Qing, early Republican reform, and also the 依法治国. So actually, the 90s already started 依法治国. And also the future of the rule of law in China. So of course, behind these legal reforms is really legal modernization and the future of the rule of law in China. Our focus then evolved along the following two lines. One line is about constitutional law. The other line of inquiry is about business law. That was very much informed by certain factors, but definitely Professor Kirby's seminal articles on Chinese company law in the 90s is really something that shaped our direction, so it's very impactful. Really, this is about the interplay between company law and the corporation. Modern corporation in this sense, of course, in the Chinese context. Now we start with, because it's fit into the broader concern of Chinese legal reforms, but with a focus on company law in this line of inquiry. I started with a cooperator who got a JD from Harvard Law School when I was a visitor there. He was a JD student. Later on, he graduated, and then I met him in Cambridge University, where he did a PhD in British company law. So happily, we became cooperators. And then we try to see, not looking at just Chinese company law development in the early 20th century, but also around the same time was the involvement of the British company law, which was still very much along the, so to say, common law kind of development, right, before they have a major sort of company law legislation. So we have a cooperation on that, company law development in China and in Britain in comparison. And then we started to think that not just the law, we have to know what's the law in action. So we need to have a company to make a comparison between UK and modern China. So for that, we try to look for companies in different industries, and we ended up with Shanghai Commercial Press in China, and a comparable case in UK is the Macmillan House. Now from that, then we move on. We realized that when we started to look at Shanghai Commercial Press, we realized that Shanghai Commercial Press was incorporated as a joint venture with a Japanese company, which is called Kinkodo. Today, I asked friends in Japan, and almost like nobody heard of it. So it's really an unknown thing. But Shanghai Commercial Press is very well known, right? So the joint venture, the other partner, actually the Japanese partner, is completely disappeared from history. So that's interesting, right? So they have one major publisher in Japan come in a joint venture with a Chinese company in China. The Chinese company remain, and the Japanese one disappear from history. Then again, it creates a lot of intellectual curiosity to us too. So this case become very interesting. Because of that, and also one more note is about the Macmillan House. We started with Macmillan House because that's the title of the book of the company. Then we realized actually it's in UK, the name of that is Macmillan and Company, London. And it incorporated another company called Macmillan Company without an N in New York. And they are separate company actually. Although the ownership is a different story, but company-wise, it's two different companies. So then we end up with the question of the interplay between law and corporation in a comparative perspective involving China, Japan, Britain, and US. So this is the journey of our inquiry. What have we done so far? We work on the comparison between the four cases in terms of the corporate governance through the sort of association of the company constitution. Last year, we presented a paper in the World Economic History Congress. So basically, we're looking at the corporate governance of these four companies. We try to see similarities and differences and so forth. And the time they were incorporated, I have the years here, you can see very quickly, it's just within 1 decade. Then they gradually sort of move on. By the way, the year they were incorporated, I just make a very short note here, is that almost like they were the first batch of companies that were incorporated with the newly approved company law in the respective jurisdiction, including New York. Right? So this is something just a note. So they're very proactive, right? The law framework changed. They were the first batch of people who took on the opportunity. Now, take away from that paper, the leader's judgment, motivation, emotional state, and personal interests appear to have played a greater part, put this way, in influencing the decision. In this sense, it's a decision about corporate governance, including incorporation, decision of incorporation, right? So secondly, the incorporation seems to reflect a process of making the full range of corporate governance matters suitable for their specific business interests and needs and so forth. So in a sense, the model is universal, is kind of a general model of modernity, actually, some people would discuss that. But in the reality, actually, it seems to be a lot of personality, personal individuality. The personal choice, freedom of personal choice seems to also play a very important role. So finally, we just sort of round up this in a very quick sentence. The 4 companies, they all reflect very successful cases of corporate personalization. So it's personalization. So person or individual actually matters. Not only the institution matters, but also individual matters. So this is the finding. So in a sense, I'm using the term from Herbert Simon, bounded rationality. It's rationality, but on the other hand, it's very much bounded by cultures, by personal interests, perception, and all these things. In action. Right? This is not just abstract theory of bounded rationality, but in action, something really, we have to look into the individual. Now, what is this paper about? So very, very simple, it's about company performance. It's because we know that these 2 companies, the Macmillan Company of New York and Shanghai Commercial Press, they represent the largest publisher, most influential publisher, or largest publisher in New York, one in New York and one in Shanghai. Our question is, what does that size mean, right? So we always use the term big business. When we talk about modern corporation, we always have this term, big business. How big is big? That's the question we have. Now, in order to do that, we try to give some numbers. So we focus on the balance sheets of 1 year. Our objective is to make a narrative that's based on accounting. We have some accounting-based narrative, not just a very impressionistic or just a very qualitative kind of description, but we want to have something that's based on the accounting, based on the balance sheets, based on the number of what the performance they have of these 2 companies. Okay, so these 2 companies is very, very easy because you all know it. You all have heard this company, you read books published by them, and you know that Shanghai Commercial Press, anyone who knows anything about China, modern China, you know this publisher. Macmillan Press, Macmillan Company, although it's not very, very very much in the front line these days, but remember this one was the one that published Science, the magazine of science, and Gone with the Wind, right? So you just remember a few of these titles. Actually, London Macmillan Press published Nature. One company published Nature, one company in America published Science, so you can imagine what kind of impact they have in the early 20th century in America and in Europe or in the English-speaking world. Okay, the data set. First of all, is the background, is the turnover, just an overall picture. The turnover is from Macmillan Company New York's profit and loss account that can be found in the Macmillan archives in the British Library. The turnover for commercial press came from a book, which is a chronology of the Shanghai Commercial Press, published by Wang Yinwu. He's a teacher of Wuxi, and he was introduced by Wuxi to pick up a position as a head of the Penyi-shuo. Penyi-shuo means translation and editorial department of the commercial press from 1921. And he became the CEO of from 1930 to 1946. So in other words, the numbers he produced, of course, I mean, he is the one who can have access of all these numbers. So I think it's very reliable from Wang Yunwu. So these are the annual turnover. We compile the data, and in order to make the numbers more easy to identify, I make it very large, and then I split the table into two. So this is the first part, ended in 1915, but then actually in our paper, it will go on to 1933, and for Shanghai is 1932. In order to analyze, these 30 years, we try to split them up into 3 10 years period. Each period, then we calculate the average growth rate. Then you can see, basically, the idea we want to present here is that they were very comparable. There's no major difference, actually very close. And if you see the turnover trend, in actual turnover, the trend is very similar. We calculate the growth rate each year is a variation. So sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. But so it's kind of fluctuation. This is normal, right? In terms of growth rates, actual growth actually is always going up, but the growth rate is sometimes faster, sometimes slower. So that's why it shows the fluctuation. Again, it's very similar. Of course, there's a sort of variation, but those variations can be easily explained by very special circumstances in the respective society. The major takeaway. Now, first observation is about the performance of growth in terms of both actual growth and growth rate. The two companies show convergence and comparability, actually, in overall trends without striking difference. And behind these numerical similarities, they actually share similar developments. First of all, both emerged in the most dynamic cosmopolitan and commercial city and as a center of publishing industry of the respective country, right? So New York and Shanghai. Secondly, both converted the partnership business into a joint stock company with limited liabilities, registered within a span of something like 10 years. Thirdly, both enjoy ample business opportunities due to important social change like education reform. That's a major one, even in America, right? So it's suddenly the spread of schools, the schooling, that create a market, a job market. That's a huge market. Right, so almost like printing textbooks or like printing money. So there's a major new market. But also new infrastructure of knowledge creation and transmission to universities, and also different school structure, education structures, and also research and so forth. So these are knowledge creation and knowledge transmission. Also advancement in printing technology and paper making. So the technology counts, because if you want to have mass production of textbook, you need the paper. That can be used in the machine, and you have the machine, but also need the paper. You can't use the traditional Chinese traditional paper, cannot be put in the machine for mass production. So even paper making is a new technology. It's an issue. So new legal framework for more effective corporate governance that I mentioned earlier, and copyright protection, and also disputes resolution, right? So this is, there's some example. Secondly, we can talk about the performance in terms of employment size, because when we say a company is big, what does it mean? It can also mean, there's a lot of people inside the company, right? So it's headcounts. In terms of employments, then there's a sharp sort of difference, diverged with sharp contrast in the policy of outsourcing. So Macmillan Company used outsourcing very extensively to maintain a very small staff, no more than 150 in 1929. Whereas commercial press had a total sort of workforce of over 5,000, 150 versus 5,000. So this is a big contrast, right? And the contrast reflected in the balance sheets, reflected in the performance of 1929, reflects something is underlying is primarily is outsourcing. Now the data set which was supposed to be our focus, 1929 balance sheets of both companies. What is highlighted there is something very important. One term is called goodwill, 5 million. So their net assets value, this one is somewhat like 11 billion. Okay, by the way, this is prepared by Price Waterhouse Company. So the account was prepared and signed off by Price Water and Company. The next one, Shanghai Commercial Press. In order to compare, we convert the Chinese yen. The original Chinese one is, of course, it's a Chinese balance sheet. We translate the Chinese into English, and also we convert the Chinese yen. Original is Chinese yen. So we convert the Chinese yen into US dollars using US Federal Reserve sort of bulletin exchange rate of a particular month and so forth. Okay. The net assets value put together is somewhat like 4.1 million for US dollars for the commercial press. And the accounting firm is CUHK accounting firm. Net asset value of commercial press, 4.2 million. What's the concept of that? So this is about 36% of the NAV of the Macmillan company. But if we deduct the 5 million of goodwill, you strike that off from the book of Macmillan company. Actually, they're getting closer. So it represents the commercial press NAV will represent the NAV of Macmillan company, somewhat like 67. So definitely, Macmillan is much bigger in terms of NAV. All right, let me move on. We make some sort of financial ratios analysis. The two sides, one side is if they're similar, they actually appear in a blue color. If they're larger, they will be in red color. But sometimes the contrast can be very big, right? Like the cash over total current assets, it can be 43% in the Macmillan side and 5% on this side. So actually, some of them actually quite a big contrast. So there's another table, and you can see that in particular all these bad debt provision and accounts receivable and so forth. This kind of ratio, commercial press is much larger compared to Macmillan. Let me just go back to the goodwill. We know that it's significant because it takes up somewhat like 46% of the total assets of the 11 billion. So what does it mean by goodwill? The accounting term of goodwill in today's accounting practice will require concrete evidence to substantiate any value you put into the book. And usually it requires a company to purchase another company, so-called undervalued company, at a price that is higher than the market value. And then the difference of the purchase price and the market value constitutes a value that you can enter into the balance sheet under the entry of goodwill. So this value reflects the intangible assets of the newly acquired company that cannot be quantified very easily by whatever terms. Now this is a sort of more contemporary practice. Whenever you see in a goodwill as a term in a balance sheet, actually it's not that subjective. It's kind of objective in a sense, right? But goodwill in the pre-World War II period, even in America, accounting practice is much less stringent about the term goodwill. So it mainly referred to general intangible value or later earning power and so forth. So it's kind of subjective. It was used actually in the Macmillan New York balance sheets, but also in Macmillan London balance sheets. I can also see that. So it seems to be kind of practice they prefer, the company prefer to use. So it's just kind of interesting kind of, you just say, okay, this is some kind of value we are going to earn in the future, and then you end up in the balance sheets. So that is some kind of practice. But of course, later on in the Macmillan New York's case, a few years down the road, the accounting standards change. Then they have to remove that 5 million. They actually wrote off the 5 million from the book. Just about, I can't remember exactly, maybe in the middle of 1930s or so. So you can imagine, you can just write off 5 million from the book, which is 46% on this side. So if we just remove that, so that then the assets of the two companies become closer. But usually I think they are not just making up the numbers, sort of subjective or randomly, but they might based on some kind of calculation. Like, let's say they have a sort of some kind of agreement with Margaret Mitchell, for example. I just imagine Margaret Mitchell. All the books you publish in the future, you have to come to us. We are the first publisher, right? Even today, actually, we have this kind of book contract by publisher. So I guess probably that's how they calculate it, and they have some bestsellers, so authors, and they can do something like that. The most important thing is recognized by the Price and Waterhouse. If Price and Waterhouse agree with that's something that you endorse. Okay, business strategies. Then we see some difference over there. So the financial data suggests some key differences between the two companies in terms of business strategies, actually. Number one, Macmillan was more risk-averse and conservative, whereas Commercial Press took on a more riskier environment with higher debt leverage and liquidity position. Macmillan opened a handful of branch offices in other parts of America and involved in the Canadian branch of Macmillan. Commercial Press was more aggressive in running branches in over 30 cities across China, including Southeast Asia. So you can see, it's very different sort of business strategy. Macmillan did not engage in vertical integration or diversification at all, whereas Commercial Press developed its publishing and printing sector at the same time. And from the printing sector, it later branched out into limited manufacturing of machineries like printing machine. They actually produce printing machine and sell to other publishers. But also Chinese typewriter. So this is something they innovate. And also consumer goods like stationaries, but one thing is very interesting, like remind me of Hong Kong's toys. These toys, that's interesting. So the Macmillan New York was an open company with more than 100 shareholders, but the ownership was highly concentrated at the hands of the Macmillan family in London. There was tension between the American-based shareholders and directors, including the president, based in America, and the London-based major shareholders. So it seems a kind of tension between the two. The major difference is the American sort of members of the company want the company to be more expansive, more aggressive, and more capitalist in a sense, whereas the major shareholders in London wanted to be very reserved. So one side take the line of small is beautiful. The other one is the bigger the better. So it seems kind of great tension between the two, right? So that reflect in the corporate governance kind of issue. Commercial Press was not only more open with more than 1,000 shareholders, but also very dispersed. There's no really major shareholder. They have larger shareholder, but none of the large shareholder can really control the company or control the stocks, right? So it's very, very dispersed. There were tensions too, but unlike Macmillan House, it was a tension between the publishing sector and the printing sector. Each side want more money, so they compete. So it's tension. But also the manufacturers, so a lot of infighting. Not only the two sectors, but also different factions, different people come in and so forth. So the ownership in Commercial Press was not a family-dominated model, but a relationship between ownership, management, labor, and so forth. They were all somewhat like family, so I use the word quasi-family. It was not a family business. The relationship somewhat like family. So they were attached to Commercial Press as a jar. Yesterday we talked about jar, almost like a family. They are not family members. So this is interesting, right? So quasi-family business. And also the one thing is about family business here is usually we have impression that families are more 和谐, harmonious. But actually, it's no. Even among family, real family members are all infighting all the time. So quasi-family the same, all infighting. But quasi-family means there were times in crucial moments people will come up, even in the tension in the strike between the laborers, the labor union, and the management. The labor union will say, "We're family. You are treating the family members so poorly, so badly. So raise my wage, raise my salary." So this is very interesting. The kind of family concept in a company that is not based on real family relation. Final thing is just really some afterthought. So the two company stories imply triumph of modern cooperation in the book industry across cultures. Now, across cultures, because I'm using the two really different kind of society. Well, the values and strategies in the book industry, as reflected in the balance sheets, dictated by the logic of modern cooperation, and was it showing some kind of trend of convergence, global convergence, or globalization? And was the legal dimension of the modern cooperation a decisive factor? As the theory should go, we all thought that it's important. Without company law, there's no cooperation. Actually, it's true. It's true. Otherwise, we cannot talk about the triumph of modern cooperation. But on the other hand, is it how decisive it is, right? How decisive, and if it's not the most decisive one, what are the other factors? How these factors interact with each other, and so forth. So again, does it reflect a convergence or globalization? Okay, with that, I just stop here. Thank you very much.